Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. February 29th, 2024, Leap Day. Could they actually leap over Biden and dump him edition? I'm David Plotz, CityCast. I'm in Washington, D.C., by the way. And I'm joined by John Dickerson of CBS Primetime in New York City. Hello, John.
Hi.
And from New Haven, Connecticut, Emily Bazelon of the New York Times Magazine and Yale University Law School from New Haven. Hello, Emily.
Hey, David. Hey, John.
This week on the Gabfest, anxiety increases among Democrats as uncommitted wins 100,000 votes in an uncontested Michigan primary against Joe Biden. Then the Supreme Court hears a pair of fascinating cases about social media platforms, censorship, and the First Amendment, and also dockets the big Trump immunity case. And then Mitch McConnell is stepping down as the Republican Senate leader after perhaps the most effective career of any politician this century. Plus, of course, we'll have cocktail chatter. And a reminder, or not even a reminder, an announcement. We are going to be live in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, March 27th at 7:30 at the Hamilton. There's going to be a pre-show cocktail party as well. You can get tickets at slate.com/Gabfest live. That's going to be a live show on a Wednesday evening, March 27th here in D.C. New venue, the Hamilton. It's great. It's going to fill up fast, so get your tickets. And we have a special guest that we're going to announce soon, or we believe we have a special guest that we're going to announce soon. And it's going to be really fun. So would love to see you there. It's going to be our first live show of the new year. It's going to be coming at a moment of all kinds of legal action and political action. So it's going to be a great moment for discussion. Slate.com/Gabfest live for tickets. Hey there, Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. So whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI. And stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence. Uncommitted had an amazing night in Michigan this week, capturing more than 100,000 votes in the Democratic primary. As Zach Gorchow talked about on our Slate Plus segment last week, any number over 50,000 was going to be a blow to Biden. And Uncommitted just crashed through that to get to 100,000 and 13% of the vote. Uncommitted was a movement organized originally by Arab Americans unhappy with Biden's full-throated support of Israel in the Gaza war. And the Uncommitted vote won majorities in two big Arab American cities of Michigan, the two big Arab American cities, Dearborn and Hamtramck. But it also picked up big votes in Michigan's college towns. So, John, how dismaying or shocking should this be for Biden's team?
I guess when I think about that question, I think about where does it fit in the priorities that they have to face to get reelected? Like they have a lot of challenges for Biden. And so is this a challenge? Yes. How big a challenge is it? And more crucially, how much can they really do about it? If the answer to solving this problem is get peace in the Middle East, well, who'd have thought of that? Right? Like the question, it's kind of like what we were talking about with respect to what Biden could do to overcome questions about his age. Well, he could go out and be vigorous and do lots of public events. Well, being vigorous and doing lots of public events has all kinds of downsides, as we saw from President Biden speaking about the possibility of a hostage exchange while eating an ice cream cone as a part of the Seth Meyers appearance.
I got a little cash. If anybody want ice cream?
Yes, okay.
Will you turn the camera? Do you want any?
Yes.
It's not a bribe.
Can you give us a sense of when you think that ceasefire will start, sir?
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. I mean, the end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
That wasn't the greatest visuals to be talking about the exchange of prisoners and hostages. So there are all kinds of challenges to getting Middle East peace. So could you even fix the problem? Yes, it's a problem. 100,000 is a big number. It's a big number because he won the state by 150,000 against Trump. So, but a lot of Democrats turned out for Biden, which made the percentage 13% against Obama in 2012. Uncommitted got about 11%. Now, it got that uncommitted vote was only 20,000 votes. So 100,000 is a great deal more than 20,000. So I'm not trying to downplay, just trying to put it in perspective. Then the question is really when the choice gets framed between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, Donald Trump's policies not only are going to be identical or worse with respect to the Israel-Hamas war, but people might be reminded that Donald Trump was the one who wanted to ban Muslims from coming into the United States. So that might change it. So the question is, can they do a lot about it? Might gravity help them? Then the final point, of course, is Michigan is a super crucial state for Biden in the general election, one of the key battleground states. And it's hard to think of how he wins without winning Michigan.
Yeah, it's right now it's the tipping point state for Biden, and he's polling behind Trump and has kind of been consistently polling poorly there, Emily. Do you think, to John's point, that there's any policy shift that Biden could realistically make on Gaza or on issues that are animating progressive students that wouldn't hurt him in other ways and backfire in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really complicated and hard, but I mean, first of all, the war could end. I mean, the war is serving the interests primarily of Benjamin Netanyahu keeping his government in power in Israel, and then Hamas, which, is watching Israel's acceptance around the world deteriorate, which is something that the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote about this week. So that's, I think, a huge part of what's happening is the war and all the deaths of Palestinians in Gaza. I also think that moving toward supporting Palestinian self-determination and statehood is really important. And the Biden administration has been saying those things and distancing itself from Netanyahu's government, but not really pushing and not confronting Netanyahu. I mean, don't you guys think it's in Netanyahu's interest for Trump to get elected in the fall, because Trump will be much more pro his right-wing policies than Biden. And you just have this feeling that Biden has not figured out how to take on Netanyahu in a way that's good for Biden politically. And obviously, the United States and Israel have this longstanding friendship and allyship, and there's lots of history there. But at some point, it just seems like maybe Netanyahu is taking Biden down, and Biden has got to figure out how to get out of that trap.
Well, Biden might care about something more than the politics at the moment. I mean, in other words, he's not going to be able to do anything to fix the uncommitted issue right now at this current moment. So breaking with Netanyahu might have all kinds of other consequences, including the U.S.'s ability to actually influence events to the extent they can do anything. It's got to be, the roads have to lead through Netanyahu. I mean, play out what's the strategy if he breaks with Netanyahu, or if he had broken with Netanyahu a month ago, how that works. It doesn't seem like Netanyahu is really listening to, particularly in a public sense, pressure from the United States. So Biden breaks with him, and then Netanyahu does what that is in the positive aims of the uncommitted vote?
I mean, I don't think Netanyahu is ever going to do anything in the positive aims of anything that people are voting uncommitted care about. But Netanyahu does not necessarily stay in power. I mean, there isn't an election scheduled for 2 years, but he could get ousted sooner. And there has been this argument that, if Biden confronts him, that will only strengthen him. But I'm becoming increasingly skeptical of that and just feeling some sense of urgency about that whole situation. I don't think he can do anything right now. I'm talking about looking ahead to the election.
Exactly. So if Biden can't do anything right now, his maximum leverage over Netanyahu is by not publicly breaking with Netanyahu. If that's true, which it feels like it is, then the best way for him to be effective with respect to the actual crisis is to work in the inside game with Netanyahu instead of having a break, even though a break might be more palatable to the people in Michigan who voted uncommitted.
Given how many people voted uncommitted, there is a new energy among Democrats who want Biden to consider stepping off the ticket to allow someone they say could be more likely to win against Trump to have a shot.
Is there?
Emily, yeah. What do you mean, is there? Is there new energy?
Well, there's definitely lots of discussion.
No. There are lots of
Ezra
Klein wrote a piece, but I mean, look at Dean Phillips. The guy, he got fewer votes than Marianne Williamson, who's out of the race. If there was all this huge energy to dump Biden that wasn't related to this very specific point we've been discussing, don't you think the alternative candidate would have gotten more than 2 point whatever he got?
Well, I don't think anyone thinks that Dean Phillips is the person who is the great standard bearer the Democrats could run against Trump. I think they have a fantasia that, a brokered convention.
But who's they?
Put a Raphael Warnock candidacy with Gretchen Whitmer.
Right, but
I don't know who that is, John. But Ezra Klein is one of the most prominent figures writing in the left in this country, and Ezra is hazarding it, and there's a lot of commentary on it. You can tell why you can explain why it's a stupid idea.
But there's commentary about it. But my point is, if there was lots of unfocused, active energy that was anti-Biden, or that was we got to get something else. It's not crazy to think that it would show up in some way in Michigan.
Well, didn't 100,000 people showed up and voted for uncommitted?
We've already talked about how that has a specific sense. And also, if you look at how Biden has voted in the rest of the primaries so far, they roughly tracked what Obama did in 2012, except in New Hampshire.
Let's agree that the punditry class is having a big discussion.
That's for sure. The punditry class is different, but the difference, but it's crucial.
Well, first of all, that's the class we belong to.
I understand, but you got to frame it with respect to the punditry class, because it's really important. Because one of the things that Biden did well in 2020 is his campaign ignored the punditry class and the super online class, and that's why he won. That's why he won the nomination. Like, it's a key skill of his. So framing what's real and what's not is like a super crucial question in this moment.
Fair.
You accepted. It's just Ezra Klein and two people having dinner with him who were talking about this. If there are any arguments in favor of what Ezra is saying, I think the arguments are that Biden's age, his frailty, his apparent inability to campaign effectively are extremely damaging to him in a race against Trump. That in 2020 he got more or less a pass on campaigning. He didn't have to campaign, so nobody had to actually see him campaign because of COVID. He campaigned from his house, and to actually have to go out and present an argument for what he's doing and what he's done is something he cannot do well, and he's polling very poorly against Trump. And therefore, it's a possibility that someone who has more energy, who can articulate a Democratic vision more vividly, could animate younger voters, animate some of these voters who are turning away, and wage an effective campaign against Trump and win. The problem, of course, there's so many problems. You guys can now outline all the problems.
Well, one problem is the magical thinking about how we get to this special someone else, because the obvious person is Vice President Kamala Harris. Ezra talked about her as this deeply unappreciated politician or underestimated politician. He didn't present any evidence for that. I don't see any myself. And then you have this kind of fantasy of this brokered convention. And Jamelle, Bouie, I thought, did a really good job of explaining that the convention doesn't represent constituencies in the way that it used to, that now it's like largely symbolic. And so the notion that even if they did come up with the magical Whitmer Warnock ticket, it's not clear that it would really have a lot of legitimacy after everybody has voted for Biden. And then there's the question of could Biden really, he would have all the delegates. They would be committed to supporting him. And so it would be really up to him. And then it probably would be Kamala Harris. And we kind of get back into this loop of whether this is really a stronger ticket.
One of the things that's been most, I think, impressive about this public debate among Democratic intellectuals or political intellectuals is... I
like it. They've gone from pundits to intellectuals now.
I think you have to put Jamelle and Ezra in that category. I think the super online reaction is dumb, but the articles that were written both in favor of the idea and against it were all serious, didn't do a bunch of stupid motive questioning, and actually showed an incredibly sophisticated understanding of politics, primaries. It was really a joy to read all of the different arguments. I think the only thing I would add to what both of you have said is that one of Ezra's claims also is that there is a structure in place for a brokered convention, and therefore it could manage this kind of open free-for-all. I think the problem is that structure is highly antiquated. It comes from a time in politics long before the reforms of 1972 and the general increase in the voice of the people over the voice of the party. The structured convention, the brokered convention, was a product of a completely boss-centered party, or a highly boss-centered party, which started to crumble in 1960 in the Democratic Party with Kennedy's defeat of the bosses by using the primaries, an amazing thing. And then I think Jamelle, of all of them, really put most beautifully the important thing, which is that this what gives candidates legitimacy is the process, not the brokered part. It's the getting the votes, and that without that legitimacy, you would elevate a weakened candidate. And of course, the other point, which everybody made, but which is important, is that when you have inter-party fights, and actually it's not in the primary context where you can all talk about how bad Donald Trump is, the fights tend to be over really small things, and everybody gets pushed to the left because they're all trying to distinguish themselves from the other person, which means you would have a national advertisement about the most liberal things right at a time when you're supposed to be looking for voters more towards the middle.
Right. And then I'll add the one other thing, which I would call the Ron DeSantis factor, which is that all candidates, all hypothetical candidates, are unicorns who fart cotton candy until they are actually tested, and then you don't know. Like, it's entirely possible that on a national stage, Gretchen Whitmer would be the greatest candidate since Bill Clinton. Very possible, since Barack Obama. But it's also possible that this person who gets anointed turns out to be an absolute dud, as we saw with DeSantis. So that's enormously risky. I want to give a huge thank you to our Slate Plus listeners, because of listeners like you. In fact, not just like you. We've been able to keep doing the Gabfest for so long, and you get so much good stuff for your subscription. Bonus segments on every episode, special discounts to live shows like our live show coming up in DC, no hitting the paywall on the Slate site, so much more. This week for our Slate Plus segment, we're going to be talking about the increasingly elaborate, even unhinged efforts by the Republican House to pin some kind of corruption charge on Joe Biden via his family. But this segment is just for Slate Plus members. If you are a Slate Plus member, thank you. If you're not, go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus to become a member today.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, and identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. The Supreme Court heard arguments in a pair of cases this week challenging laws passed by Florida and Texas designed to prevent social media companies. Incidentally, what is a social media company? That is a good question. From removing, hiding, or downplaying conservative speech on their platforms. A coalition of tech companies challenged the laws, and a whole set of arguments that came out are really quite fascinating. But before we get to those social media cases, let's start briefly with the news that the court will take its own sweet time on the presidential immunity claim that Trump is making as regards the January 6th criminal case he's facing. And that may well delay any possible criminal trial of Trump, certainly in the January 6th case, until after the election. So Emily, do you want to just orient us around this immunity case and when the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on it and when that means a decision is likely and what that would mean for a criminal trial?
The Supreme Court is going to hear arguments on April 22nd, and that means that it's likely that a decision won't come until the end of the court's term at the end of June. Now, of course, it's possible they could rule sooner, but they're not moving this with some, speed of light alacrity. And all of this just is a big gift-wrapped present for Donald Trump because delay has been his tactic all along. If the court rules at the end of June, could a trial really get underway before the election? I mean, it's not impossible, but every day that passes makes it more difficult. And what, to me, is just, I have to say, infuriating about this, I woke up fuming in the middle of the night about it, is that this is a slam dunk legal question that has been answered cogently and soberly by two lower courts. The Supreme Court could just let the DC Circuit ruling stand that explains in great detail why a president cannot have utter and complete immunity for every single thing he did in office, like writ large. Just think about that. It's breathtaking. It's like saying that we have a king, that while you're in office, you can do absolutely anything with impunity. The idea that the court has to take months to, stroke its chin over these arguments, I just don't get it.
One thing that was confusing in the initial reaction to this is a lot of supporters of, or a lot of people on the left said, this is outrageous. They're suggesting there's some question to figure out here. And then other people said, no, the court is deciding, possibly. We don't know what it's deciding. But one avenue is that the court could decide this is such an issue of import that the court must speak because there's no precedent for it. And that it was still possible that you could have a 9-0 on the side of all the rational things you said, which is the country was not founded with this idea in mind.
Oh, it's totally possible to be 9-0, though I really doubt it. It'll be 7-2. Let's be real. Like Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito are going to vote on the other side, perhaps. But even if it's 9-0, the time they are taking is essential. And so, yes, in an ideal world, with all the time in the world, the Supreme Court would settle this ridiculous but important unsettled question in American law and not leave it for the next time. But we don't live in an ideal world. We live in a world in which it is entirely possible that someone that's facing major criminal indictment will win the presidency with this shadow unresolved, and then the case will be postponed indefinitely, and we'll never get an answer. And I just feel like there is something really untoward about that. Like, it makes the country's legal system seem very shaky and unserious, and that will be happening. Donald Trump will have thumbed his nose, successfully gotten away with all of these dodges as he becomes president again for the next 4 years. Think about that.
Isn't the argument, maybe this is what I felt this is where you were going, John, isn't the argument that if you assume, for the sake of argument, that Donald Trump is going to become president again, isn't it important that the Supreme Court will have issued such a ruling saying that presidents are criminally liable for their behavior? And absent, if they had simply kicked forward a DC Circuit opinion, you're missing this clarion crystal judgment by the highest court in the land. And so it puts the Trump administration on notice about that. That would be an argument for it.
That's an argument. And then you just have to weigh it against all the other problems. But yes, that's true.
And the other problems, can we just illuminate some of them? So the one is basically that the Supreme Court takes its time. Then Judge Tanya Chutkan says, OK, we can start the clock again, which means some number of months to allow the two teams to prepare because they've been told to stop and put their pencils down for the moment. So that takes some number of months. Then trial itself has to take place. That's if everything's moving along on ice. Obviously, Trump's strategy has been to delay, so there'll be lots of delays. And then so basically you could have a situation in which the trial doesn't take place, or and then if Trump wins, he basically shutters everything because he now controls the Justice Department. The other challenge is to Merrick Garland, right? So let's say the court decides, comes out, then suddenly there are going to be pieces every day in all your major newspapers from people saying, well, shouldn't he let the people decide and tell Smith to step down? Now, presumably Garland will say, look, I didn't tell her what to do, and so I'm not going to tell Smith. But it's going to be a topic of conversation, every day, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, the more we get into the heat of the political season and campaigning, the more legitimate the arguments against having someone on trial while they are the presidential nominee of a major party become. Then I should also mention that, remember the Mar-a-Lago documents case in Florida, that judge, who is a Trump appointee, is on Friday revisiting the whole question of when that trial might happen. I think it's currently scheduled for May, but she could postpone that. And of course, we have all the issues going on with the Georgia prosecution, which is a giant case, and it's really hard to see how that could go on trial before November, even if Fani Willis wasn't under scrutiny. So we're looking at the hush money trial in Manhattan. The kind of smallest, least significant case is the only one that seems to be on track.
Can I raise one possible question, which is, okay, let's say the trial doesn't take place. Is it a certainty in this world that having January 6th and Donald Trump's role in it, with all the footage of the attackers on the 6th waving their Trump flags and all the testimony from Trump insiders at the center and his insistence that the election was stolen, which is an act of delusion, that having that in the center of the campaign all the way to the end is so great for Donald Trump? I mean, I get how he doesn't want to have a trial. But in terms of what the election is about, I mean, if you look at Donald Trump assert that he won in his interview with Bret Baier of Fox News, it was the locked teeth delusion of a person who really believes that. And is having that all the way through to the election, is that super great for Trump?
I mean, the rational answer would be no, but is it going to move enough voters?
Let's go to this case that was argued already in the Supreme Court. So, Emily, it's such a fascinating set of issues. And I guess they hinge on a bunch of key questions, but one is, are social media platforms common carriers like telephone companies where what is said can't be constrained by the operator? Or are they more like newspapers or bookstores where they make decisions about what to emphasize and promote based on their judgment? And if the federal government tries to stop the platform from exercising editorial judgment, is it protecting free speech of politically moderated posters who would otherwise be suppressed? Or is it infringing on the free speech of the platforms to moderate it? So, whoa.
I know. It is really interesting. We are talking about two state governments, Florida and Texas here, not the federal government. You're absolutely right to kind of search for an analogy. And I think the Texas law only applies to platforms, right? And so this analogy of the telephone company seems to not be apt in that context. Like when you're talking about the things you see on your feed that everybody else can see, then this idea of, you can't interfere with the private messages what people are saying over the phone, that doesn't seem like it really works. Whereas in Florida, their law potentially covers like Gmail and Facebook Messenger, the things that are people talking to each other that other people can't hear and see. So that's like one distinction here. Then there's this larger question about whether what the platforms do when they moderate content is exercising editorial judgment. And what the platforms are saying is, yes, for purposes of our First Amendment rights, this is our speech. We're making decisions. We're blocking hate speech because we think it's offensive. That's our decision about what to say. Florida and Texas came in and said, you can't do that because this is the public square. But the longtime doctrine in this area is that if you're a private speaker, and social media platforms are private corporations, right? Then yes, you can manage content. And the government cannot require you to talk or require you not to let someone else talk. There is a real irony here, which is that last year, the platforms were arguing to the Supreme Court that they had immunity from lawsuits under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act because they were not the same as newspapers and they weren't really editors. And oh no, like what we do is not speech for that purpose. And so there were some biting moments at argument where Justice Alito in particular was pushing Paul Clement, the lawyer for the social media platforms, on that. And I am really interested in that. But these laws do seem like they're really problematic for what social media platforms actually do without being able to moderate content with things like hate speech and disinformation. They become total cesspools and then their customers don't want to be there anymore, at least presumably.
Well, as from a public policy standpoint, couldn't you make the case that, well, if that's the case and nobody wants to be there anymore, the market decides and it collapses because it's a cesspool, and that's a better outcome than having the government pick winners and losers? Isn't the public policy case that's more powerful that they become a cesspool and there's misinformation and people still keep going, that customers keep flocking to it and it then becomes the news source, and that, spoils public life because you're basically giving a megaphone to things that undermine public life.
Does the government's interest in the First Amendment extend to a duty to help create spaces where reasonable discussion can occur? I feel like one of the responsibilities, obviously there's a First Amendment which infringes on the government's ability to stop people from speaking, but does the government have any affirmative responsibility to allow spaces where conversation can be humane and productive to occur, or does it not at all?
That's a great question. Our First Amendment doctrine is not about creating humane and productive spaces. It's about saying that if it is truly a public forum, then the government can't discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. Now, all of this is different from what social media platforms can do because they are private entities.
Yeah. I also think there's this important point that I can't remember who made it, is that the Florida and Texas explicitly passed these laws to advance conservative speech. And it seems like the Supreme Court should look very much askance at a government effort to explicitly help a particular political interest. It's not merely a neutral thing that they're doing. They're literally doing this so that they would advance conservative speech. They said this in passing it, and that's a problem.
Yeah. And they were making up a fake concern because the social media platforms have been excellent for conservative speech.
If the facts of the case were different and it was being suppressed, isn't that cause enough for somebody to step in and say, wait, the free speech rights of these, pro-abortion rights people are being suppressed in, Alabama?
I mean, again, it just depends what your analogy is. If you're talking about Fox News as the analogy, then we are used to the idea that Fox News can promote certain political viewpoints and suppress others, and nobody blinks an eye. If you're talking about it being, like the town square or the telephone company, then no, we become uncomfortable again. And the problem is that social media companies are none of those things. I mean, my own favorite metaphor for them is a mall, because I think at a mall, you don't think a lot about whether you're in private or public space until maybe the mall cops show up and they're not the police. And that is analogous, right? The content moderators are not government actors. They are privately hired forms of security because this is a corporation and you are in a corporate space, right? You're in Disney World, effectively. And that is just really hard for us to quite figure out what to do with because they have so much power. I mean, in some ways, because they're international and they can't be governed by any one national government, they're more powerful than anyone else. But our First Amendment just doesn't sit comfortably with that role.
One of the things I was also unclear on is how much of this has to do with the social media companies literally not publishing speech, like stopping it from being published, banning people, and how much of it has to do with not emphasizing it, not giving it prominence. Because I think there are different things. Like there's no, you can publish a book, but a bookstore doesn't have to stock it prominently, put it in the window. And is the main complaint that the social media companies are literally preventing you from posting your hateful screed, or is it they are just declining to show your hateful screed to anybody except you?
I mean, they do both those things. They do actually delete some posts. They much more, I think, look at what you're posting and then change whether they amplify your speech or not. And I think the argument that they get to decide what to amplify and how the algorithms are going to work, and that's an editorial set of judgments, like, to me, that totally makes sense. I just also think it applies in the Section 230 context. And I think this whole broad immunity from lawsuits is something that the government, the courts, and the Congress should revisit.
One of the interesting edge cases for me is like group chats and more like the WhatsApp, the sort of group chats, which had lots and lots of people in them, which are sort of public, but not exactly public, but can be filled with extremely hateful or incendiary speech. And whether those, because those are, on the one hand, are they private communication channels, more like the phone, or are they public because they're widespread groups and they're almost like broadcasting? I don't know if they'll decide on that.
That's a really good question. I mean, some of these questions really should go back to the lower courts for more perusal. And there's a whole problem in this case, which is that they were brought under what's called a facial challenge, which means that a law that regulates speech can succeed only if the challengers can demonstrate that the law is substantially overbroad. Because of that posture of the case, there's just some confusion about how the court is going to sort out these underlying questions. I think they'll just figure it out. They'll issue an order that probably strikes down the laws. That's what this direction they seem to be going in, but also leaves a lot of the details to get sorted out later. That's my guess.
In-laws, love them or hate them, you're pretty much stuck with them. And when you're a ruler in the Middle Ages, that can be a serious problem. It might even land you dead. I'm Dan Jones, and on Season 4 of This Is History, I'm telling the story of England's weirdest king, Henry III. He's in way over his head, and he's surrounded by bloodthirsty relatives with their eyes on his throne. To listen, search This Is History and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Mitch McConnell will step down as the Republican Senate leader and the longest-serving Republican Senate leader at the end of this year, although he'll continue, he says, to serve out his term, which ends in 2026. It has been an incredible run for the Kentucky senator, the undoubted capstone achievement being the blocking of Merrick Garland's appointment to the Supreme Court in 2016 to succeed Justice Scalia, thus preserving a conservative majority on the court, and then also quite likely, I think almost inarguably, winning Trump the presidency. He's the most effective, cold-blooded deal-making senator of our lifetime. And as he left, he offered this wonderful analysis about why he was going.
Believe me, I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them. That said, I believe more strongly than ever that America's global leadership is essential to preserving the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan discussed.
John, what does he mean when he says he understands the politics of the moment and that's why he's leaving?
It's such a great question. He's such a fascinating character. And in the same way McKay Coppins wrote about Romney as a way to think about politics in this moment, Mitch McConnell and the course of his career starting as a Reagan Republican and where he is now, actually going back even to when he worked in the Senate before he was a senator, in a much more liberal kind of Republican Party.
He was at the March on Washington.
What does it mean? Okay, I think what it means, it can mean one of two things. I talked to Paul Kane of the Washington Post about this on Wednesday night, and I said basically, is he admitting when he says that this is Donald Trump's party and he has no place in it? And Paul said, not exactly. He's admitting that on his position on Ukraine and his view of the way the Senate works and should work is out of step with his party, which is effectively saying the same thing, but I think makes a smart distinction, which is that a lot of the forces that have now swamped the kind of republicanism and the kind of institutional interest that McConnell has started before Donald Trump. And Trump is both grew out of them and then inflamed them. I mean, so the Tea Party movement, the kinds of senators who replaced the ones that McConnell used to be able to work with on his own team, those have been brought in by forces that are beyond just Donald Trump. One of the great examples is Rob Portman in Ohio, a guy who wanted to get stuff done, was, an old fashioned Republican, low tax, pro-trade, anti-Russia, but would work within the institution to get things done with Democrats, replaced by J.D. Vance. None of those things. And also J.D. Vance, a kind of public, Mike Pence wasn't right to certify the vote kind of Republican, going out and talking all the time. Portman went out and talked when it was about, lowering marginal rates or other kind of technical things. And so is a more boisterous, play to the cameras kind of Republican, which is a harder kind of Republican to deal with when you're a majority leader. And whoever the next majority leader is, it's going to be a real challenge.
So, Emily, I think I admire McConnell. I obviously don't admire what he's done, but I find him a remarkable figure. Will the country miss his form of extremely conservative but pragmatic deal making, or will it not?
Chuck Schumer was definitely pouring one out for McConnell, right? I mean, they've worked together for a long time. And I think Schumer said, obviously, we disagree, vehemently, but I could trust McConnell. I knew where he stood. It was straightforward. You knew what you were getting. What is likely to come next is someone who is more beholden to Donald Trump. And those politics are so mercurial and whimsical, right? And that's how you have the kind of collapse of the deals that they've been trying to make in the last few months, with McConnell standing there saying it's really important that we don't let Russia take over Ukraine. Putin is our enemy. Not a clear message that one hears from Donald Trump or the elements of the Republican Party who are so loyal to him.
John, how much of McConnell's success do you think had to do with him not really caring about being liked? Thus, he was willing to sort of absorb the heat, to be unpopular for things that he wanted to get a win on, and to take the heat off of his colleagues. Was that what made him effective, or was it something else? I always admired in him that he was such an unlikable figure.
You've put your finger on a crucial, if not the crucial thing. What a source Ty Matzdorf used to say, most important thing to know about Mitch McConnell is his pain threshold. He has an extraordinarily high pain threshold. He doesn't mind being disliked. His autobiography is called The Long Game, which is essentially in the course of human history and American history, things even out over time. And if you trust in the long game, the momentary freakouts get evened out. It's basically the same version people use to invest in the stock market, right? And Biden believed in that. I think the long game is under real debate at the moment. That, in other words, we are in such a highly transactional, history gets written 10 seconds ago moment. That's a topic for another time. But I think you're precisely right, David, that he was willing to take the heat, that he only spoke, as he used to say, and was true, only spoke to the press when it was in his interest and he needed to. He didn't feel the need to constantly be in front of the cameras. That's, of course, antithetical to the modern Republican Party and slivers of the Democratic Party, where being in front of the cameras all the time is crucial. So I think that's quite important, and perhaps most important when it came to blocking Merrick Garland, which was a break with Senate tradition. And something that basically McConnell steamrolled. And it's interesting, the notion of power with a majority leader, because it has changed under McConnell's feet. The majority leader is not as powerful as people say. It's just that he had people like Rob Portman and Lamar Alexander and others who were senators within his own party who sort of shared the same worldview, and he could corral them, and they were the his biggest part of his block, and that could get other people to kind of fall in line over time. But it didn't always work. I mean, Jesse Helms, when you talk about the most cold-blooded, Jesse Helms was pretty cold-blooded too. Now there are, it used to be that McConnell had to deal with Ted Cruz, who, was ultimately embarrassed himself when he tried to kill Obamacare. But now there's a block of 8, 10, 12 of these kinds of Republicans. So the job was never one where you could rule with an iron fist. And when you have a more restive caucus, it makes it that much harder. And so pain threshold only gets you so far, because there's no gain for the pain you're experiencing. But that pain threshold was not high enough to stand up against Trump's election lie much earlier than he ultimately did.
The senators touted as his most likely replacement are John Thune of South Dakota, who's the Senate whip, Republican whip, John Cornyn of Texas, who had leadership for many years, though hasn't been in leadership, and John Barrasso of Wyoming. They're all kind of in the same mode. Barrasso a little bit more conservative than the others. They're all pretty conservative, but also on the deal-making side of the ledger. A, will one of them certainly get it? And B, is it, John, you're sort of implying that it won't be possible to lead in the way that McConnell has been leading, even if you have that temperament?
I think it's not possible to, unless you do what the kind of, I think it's just not possible. There's too much benefit to there's a great story that was told about Hewlett Humphrey, and I guess it was maybe Mike Mansfield, who was a majority leader at the time, who was the previous record holder of the longest serving majority leader before McConnell, that basically Hewlett Humphrey came to the Capitol, came to Washington and was like, I'm going to do this and that. And he had press conferences and he was bouncing around. He was like making a name for himself. And either Mansfield or some other senior bull said, buddy, that's cute and all, but like, you're never going to get a committee assignment. You're never going to have any power to actually do any of the stuff that you say you want to do unless you kind of follow the rules and norms of the inside game. Right. So, OK, that was just a very previous Senate. Now, all of your power comes from showing up on TV, raising money, being super online and being incendiary. So that's really hard to control. I think that, again, I'm just stealing from Paul here. Whoever gets this job will have had to have corralled and gotten the blessing of the kind of new MAGA, J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz types. And to do that, you will have to have the implicit or explicit blessing of Trump. And if that's the case, Donald Trump will make you an unhappy person very quickly. If for no other reason than Trump likes to remind people that they owe him and he embarrasses them. I mean, this is not exactly analogous, but look at what he did to Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham after he won South Carolina and New Hampshire. After New Hampshire, he turns to Tim Scott and says, boy, you must really hate Nikki Haley. I mean, she appointed you to a senator and yet you're endorsing me, making Tim Scott, shrinking him down to a tiny little person, embarrassing him at this moment of glory for Trump. Like, he didn't have to go and embarrass the guy who had endorsed him. It's Lindsey Graham. He introduces him to the crowd in South Carolina after he wins and says, Lindsey's to the left of everybody here on the stage, and the whole crowd boos. I mean, so when that is the kind of reward structure you're dealing with, whoever is named majority leader, Trump will take credit for the naming in the way he took credit for shooting down Tom Emmer in the House speakership race. And then that person will constantly have to deal with Trump saying either, I got you here and now you're bucking me, or patting them on the head and saying, thank you for doing what I wanted you to do. By the way, just back to the structural thing, the Senate's already the Republicans in the Senate are already doing that with respect to Trump. I mean, they killed immigration reform because of him. Chuck Grassley said he doesn't want to vote for the new tax bill because it's going to help Biden. And they are essentially killing Ukraine aid, Lindsey Graham says, because Trump doesn't want it. So either very explicitly or implicitly, they're already doing what Trump wants them to do. And that's going to be a mess for whoever the next Republican leader is.
God. All right, let's go to cocktail chatter. When you're trying to drink one off, Emily Bazelon, trying to drink away the despair that final Dickersonian comment left me with, what are you going to be chattering about?
I unfortunately have only more doom and gloom to offer, which is that Louisiana seems to be on the brink of ending parole for people who are in prison, much diminishing the power of good time credits, like the idea that you can spend a little less time in prison because of your behavioral record there and your accomplishments, like if you do educational programs. And also they seem to be thinking about ending the credit you get for the time you're in prison before you're on trial. Like your pre-trial time wouldn't count. Yes. Isn't
How
that
can
crazy?
that be?
Well,
that can't be constitutional.
It seems
How can that be constitutional?
bananas to me. I don't understand it. I mean, judges could obviously still take it into account, but it just, I find the whole thing breathtaking. I mean, the thing about all of these mechanisms is that they're ways of giving people incentive to improve their lives in prison, right? Like good time gives you a reason to take educational courses if they're available to you, and to not have a lot of rule violations. And parole, the data in Louisiana shows that people are less likely to be convicted again if they get out and they are on parole, because there are things that are actually helpful sometimes about having someone who's monitoring and supervising you, though obviously that can become burdensome as well. Anyway, this all just seems so draconian, and back to this kind of tough on crime idea that you just like treat people who are in prison as brutally as possible. And that's somehow like, that is a form of revenge that supersedes what we should be thinking about, which is like helping them do better when they get out for their own sake and for all of our sakes. It's really seems super misguided, but that's all too possible in Louisiana.
Great. Thanks. John, how about you?
Well, an anonymous bidder paid $3.72 million for a box of unopened hockey trading cards from the 1970s. That was at auction, I guess, about a week ago. And so this brings to the fore basically Schrodinger's sports card paradox, which is not what anybody calls it, but what I call it. So as you may remember, the tale of Schrodinger's cat was a paradox made up by the physicists. In this thought experiment, the cat, who was in a box that was closed and with a sealed lid, was both alive and dead, right up until you open the lid of the box. But then you wouldn't know whether opening the lid had killed the cat or the cat was dead in the box itself beforehand. Anyway, so this box of hockey trading cards could contain enormous treasures, including, so there are 48 packs in there, which means there might be as many as 30 rookie cards from Wayne Gretzky, one of the greatest players to ever play hockey. And one of those rookie cards recently sold for more than $3 million. So that's what could be in the box. Or the box could contain packs and packs and packs and packs of players who've been long forgotten to everybody, right? To everybody but their mother. And they have in their rec rooms, with the paneled walls, faded photographs of them on the ice from the 1970s, flashing a toothy grin at people passing on the shag rug. And there could be no value in these cards. And so, plus it would have some old, discarded, rotten gum. But anyway, so what does the owner do? If they want to resell the box that is unopened for a profit, the auction house said, don't open it.
Yeah.
But I mean, oh my God, what if you opened it and you had all of these amazing cards in there?
I feel like Schrodinger never had a cat, because have you ever tried to put a cat in a box? It is practically impossible.
You know what? I think here's the thing. If you're trying to sneak by a theory about quantum physics and you don't want other items to interrupt the flow of thought, you make it a cat because people have lower opinions of the passage of a cat.
Yeah, if you put the dog in, people are going to be talking. They're going to be worried a lot more about the dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What kind of dog was it? Had
exactly.
It had a walk already.
Oh my God, it's a beagle. I love beagles.
Did it pee in the box?
Yeah.
My chatter is, I read a wonderful novel, which I commend to you, especially Emily Bazelon. It's called Plain Song. It's by Kent Haroof. Emily is shaking her fist enthusiastically. It's like Gilead, but if Gilead were happy, if Gilead weren't gruesome and depressing, or it's like a modern Willa Cather novel. It's a novel set in a small town in Colorado in the 1980s, and it's about some various sorts of lonely people who connect and have extremely minor problems that they need to resolve, and it's beautiful. And you know what else it reminded me of, actually, Emily, is Understood Betsy. Also,
such a good book. It's great that you're thinking of that. Yeah,
the kid's book about a girl who's sent to live with a family she doesn't know, because there's a person who ends up living with a not her family in this book, and it's wonderful. Anyway, I loved it so much. So, Plain Song by Kent Haroof.
Maybe I'll go reread that. It was so good, that book, and I don't remember it.
Yeah, and it seems to be part of a trilogy. So I just got a notice actually as we were taping that the next book is on hold at the library for me. So I'm going to go get that. Also, self-interested chatter, which is that CityCast is hiring big time. We are hiring in Nashville and Austin and Houston. And if you go to citycast.fm/jobs, we're hiring podcast producers, podcast hosts, newsletter editors in those cities. And we're going to be launching in Austin and Nashville in the spring. And in Houston, we're hiring a new executive producer to lead that great team in the podcast newsletter that already exists. So it's creating daily local podcasts for those cities. So if you're in Austin, Nashville, can be in Austin, Nashville, love Austin, Nashville, and want to cover them, please reach out. You can also email me, davidplotz@gmail.com, but citycast.fm/jobs for those listings. Listeners, you have great chatters. You've emailed them to us at gabfest@slate.com. We really appreciate them. There have been a lot coming in. There were 2 glorious ones. One we almost even turned into a Slate Plus segment, but it was Emily, it's like a minute too late in suggesting that. But our listener chatter this week comes from Jacob in Chicago, Illinois.
Hey, Gabfest. Jacob here from Chicago, Illinois. For my listener chatter, I bring you a Gabfest favorite, Strodes. The TikTok account @CitiesByDiana has some of the best car-centric content on the internet. Wryly written as if for fans of Strodes, what Diana calls oil-pilled pavement princesses or dyed-in-the-wool autobrains. This account rips into Citi's poor urban planning. My favorites were the takedowns of San Jose, California, and Breezewood, Pennsylvania. There is, of course, a ranking of the top Strodes in America, including one so bad it's considered a stryway. As a spoiler, number 1 is US Route 19, the Strode in the Vox article that started it all. The sardonic, satirical content will make you laugh, then cry, and then look at the built environment around you with a more critical eye. Happy Stroding!
That's our show for today. Gabfest is produced by Shana Roth. Our researcher is Julie Hugan, back from her winter vacation in Yellowstone. Ask her about the bison. Ask her about the buffalo. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Operations, and Alicia Montgomery is the VP of Audio for Slate. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week. And please come to our live show in D.C. on March 27th. Tickets at slate.com/GabFestLive. Hi, Slate Plus. How are you? A key element of the Republican investigation of the Biden crime family appeared to disintegrate last week with the arrest of Alexander Smirnov. Smirnov, you may have heard, he appears to be the only source of the most explosive claim against Joe and Hunter Biden, which is that they each took a $5 million bribe to help the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. But rest assured, listeners, that Smirnov's arrest will not deter, in any way, alter the massive investigation into Hunter Biden, presidential brother James Biden, and others involving claims that they conspired with President Biden to corruptly do business in China and Ukraine, and also computers, and also drugs and taxes and everything else. So there's this amazing stat, I don't know if you guys saw this, from Matt Iglesias, which is that there have been 70 hours of Hunter Biden hearings and 13 bills related to Hunter Biden. I doubt there have been 70 hours of hearings about the budget or Ukraine, congressional hearings, or Ukraine aid, or the Gaza war, or income inequality, or anything. What is going on with this obsession, John?
I think what's going on is what we were kind of talking about earlier in the change in the reward structure of the modern Republican Party. All parties have, to one way or another, rewarded their most partisan scrappers in the public square. But I mean, this is now the entire business of government.
That was just a snippet from our Slate Plus conversation. If you want to hear the whole conversation, go to slate.com/GabFest Plus to become a member today.